Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, or good morning, depending on where you've joined us from today. Welcome to a very special webinar presentation this afternoon on a guide to applying road safety within a workplace. And this is proudly brought to you by our group in conjunction with the NRSPP. The NRSPP has been established to provide a collaborative network for Australian businesses so they can improve road safety within their organisation and their sphere of influence. It aims to help businesses of all sizes across all sectors to build road safety initiatives specific to their own workplace and beyond. Importantly, it intends to bring together and promote conversations between businesses, government and researchers in order to help Australian organisations develop a strong safety culture, which is critical to running a successful business. NRSPP has developed a range of case studies, runs working groups on key industry issues, and is developing a benchmarking tool. This webinar is part of helping share workplace-related road safety knowledge, which applies not only during work hours, but of course when their staff are off duty. And a warm welcome to all of you who have joined us today. Before we commence our presentation, I will of course introduce our three guest presenters today, as well as talk through a couple of housekeeping items before we move on with the presentation. My name is Angela Juhasz and I will be your friendly webinar moderator today, so if you do have questions I encourage you to send those through and I'll make sure they're sent to the appropriate presenter. Now on the topic of our presenters, our first cab off the rank is James Newton. James is the Principal of Transport Safety Solutions and founder of the Transport Safety Collaboration. James has been engaged as a consultant with the NRSPP from the conception, as well as leading the development of the Workplace Road Safety Guide. Welcome, James. How are you going today?
Yeah, good, Angela. Thanks.
Lovely to have you on board today. Next, we have Darren Wishart, who is described as a research fellow in work-related road safety with Cars Q. Darren has a wealth of experience in the realm of work-related road safety research and consultancy, as well as being a registered psychologist. Welcome, Darren.
Thanks, Angela. It's good to be here.
Wonderful. It's great to have you here. And last but certainly not least, we have Eric Howard, who is the Principal of Whiting Moyne, a strategic road safety advisory consultancy operating internationally since 2006. Prior to his work with Whiting Moyne, he completed 7 years as the General Manager of Road Safety at Vic Roads. Pleasure to have you with us today, Eric.
Thanks, Angela. Hello, everyone.
All right. Well, as mentioned, we'll run through a couple of the formalities before I hand over to the presenters to talk about this very exciting project. Our webinar today will be about 60 minutes in duration, and I guess that will depend on whether we get lots of questions coming through from our audience. We are recording today's session, so there's no need to take notes frantically. Just do sit back and enjoy the presentation, and we'll be sending that out to all of our participants once the webinar has concluded, along with a PDF version of the presentation material. Now, webinars do work best when they are interactive, ladies and gentlemen, so please don't be shy and ask questions, give us feedback along the way. And the way that we ask you to do that is through the questions box, which you will all see in your control panel. Just to get you practicing using that question box, I would love to hear from where our wonderful audience is joining us from today. So why don't you type that in and send it through on our end. And while we're getting those through, I will get our presenters to talk a little bit more about themselves. Now, James, I believe you'll be kicking off the presentation, is that right?
Yeah, that's correct.
And tell us a little bit more about your background and your involvement with this particular project.
Oh, with this project, I had the opportunity to establish and lead it. It's been a long time coming. And for some years ago it was identified that there was very little knowledge or resource out there for workplaces that were struggling around fleet safety and work-related road safety issues. So the intention of this was to bring together knowledge and resource, and some experts with Darren and Eric, and provide a collated and central point from which workplaces could come together. I guess some other elements there is that I've been involved with the partnership program, like as you mentioned, from conception about 4 or 5 years ago.
Wonderful. And how about yourself, Darren? Now, have you found that your psychology background has come into play with the development of this guide?
Certainly, because in psychology you're working with not only people's thoughts and attitudes but also their behaviours. So so that helps, and the components that I've sort of assisted in feeding into the document also stems from a lot of work that we've done with a lot of fleets. So it sort of, if you like, summarises a lot of the outcomes of some of that research.
Wonderful. And how about yourself, Eric? Tell us a little bit more about how you've been involved.
Well, I think, Angela, in my years with Vic Roads in road safety, it led to a natural interest, of course, in work-related road safety. But my two major contributions to this work were the safe system approach, which I was heavily involved in introducing to Australia and in promoting through the OECD in 2008, and the road safety management issues, which I've been involved with at international level in many countries for the World Bank and Asian Development Bank and others since 2006. And it's been an interesting challenge to take the important elements about road safety management that you would apply to a public authority or to at a country level and adapt those for a workplace-related activity when you have large companies and very small companies. So we've attempted to do that, and Darren and James, of course, have been a big part of it. So we're hopeful this guidance will be of use to industry and practitioners everywhere.
I'm certainly interested in hearing more. And just on that note, thank you for those of you who have typed in your whereabouts into our questions box. So thank you, Mark, who's joined us from New Zealand. We have Brenton from Werribee South, Victoria. That's nice and close to my home, actually, Brenton. Michael joining us from K&S Freighters Steel Business Unit. Jaden from Western Australia, and the list goes on. It looks like we've covered Australia and New Zealand quite nicely there across the board. So I'm sure we're all very interested to learn more about this guide and how we can apply it to our respective workplace. Over to you, James. I believe you're kicking us off.
Yeah, I believe so. Thanks, Angela. Thanks for the introduction and the early discussion. This slide we don't really need to deal with at all. It's just a legal statement that shows where the guide is placed. It's both. It's a joint effort between the Road Safety Partnership Program in Australia and ACC in New Zealand in the Fleet Safety Program. As we move forward, I just want to acknowledge as well the guide is downloadable from the NRSPP website, which the web address there is in the bottom corner. And it's also available from Fleet Safe program in New Zealand as well through ACC. So if you haven't already downloaded a copy or reviewed the guide, feel free to pick it up from either those two sites in Australia or New Zealand. And the other part of that is also would be grateful to have your feedback. It's really important to us as the guide gets developed further down the path in years to come that we can get some feedback also from the end users as to what elements were useful, what needs amending, so then it can be a real document that is tangible and a practical tool for use in the industry for work-related road safety. So before we move forward, I just want to acknowledge the funding partners, because without them it wouldn't be possible to be trying to do what we're doing, and that's the National Transport Commission for Australia, ACC New Zealand, and the Centre of Road Safety New South Wales. In bringing the guide together, there's been a lot of people involved in it. Yes, Darren, Eric and myself have fronted it, but there's been a huge amount of background work as well that's made this guide possible. Both New Zealand and Australia have had steering committees and review panels participate in this, and the review has actually been formally peer-reviewed by Laurie Moran from TARS in New South Wales and also from Tony Bliss. So as an introduction to where we want to go, I think we've discussed it a little bit already, but the intention of this guide was to provide a practical tool that could be used in both public and private sector. It wasn't relevant where it was, but more so that it was trying to help organisations with workplace road safety and work-related road safety issues. The guide is intended to be scalable, so it's usable for both small organisations, medium and large, and also organisations that operate light fleet and heavy fleet as well. So at the front of the guide there is what we've called essential messages, where we've tried to break down areas of the guide to allow organisations, if they're small, medium or large, to go straight to areas that we believe are the more relevant sections of the guide. So then they're not, for a small organisation, they don't need to review the entire document and then try and apply areas. We've actually identified areas that we think are most relevant for organisations of that size to start operating and working from. The guide's broken down into 6 chapters, 5 of them, and a conclusion will be presented today on the 5 chapters. And at the back of the guide, we've also tried to provide a whole lot of templates and links to other resources, so that not alone can you just look at the guide itself, but we've tried to direct and help and lead people to other materials and resources that are available. Throughout the guide there is 11 different case studies, so I've tried to provide some practical reality of applying road safety. And again, those templates and lists at the back of the guide, there's 8 different checklists there as well. So we want to be able to use it, organisations to use it in a day-to-day operation, and so that's practical and it's user-friendly. A fundamental quote, and I guess the cornerstone of where we were heading with the guide, was a quote here provided by Hugh Mackay, and it's, if we want to change behaviour, we must modify the environment in which the behaviour occurs, so the change condition point to and reinforce the desired behaviour. Mere messages alone won't work. And time again we have seen road safety be applied as a poster on a wall, or when a major incident takes place, that road safety is kind of given a little bit of airtime, but realistically we're talking about just messages, and in a workplace environment that has no long-term or sustainable impact. What we need to be looking at is the overall environment, the foundations of the organisation, foundations of road safety, and applying that in a workplace. So that's kind of the fundamental starting point, and the intention of this guide is to look at these foundations and the building blocks from which an organisation can use to apply in their road safety on a day-to-day basis. So from here I'm going to hand over to Darren, who's going to present on Chapter 1.
Thanks, James. So the first chapter is about commonly identified work-related road safety issues, and in this chapter we talk about particularly 11 common issues that are worthy of improvement within an organisation. However, the first thing I'd like to sort of acknowledge with this chapter is there's a number of building blocks that we believe are required to improve work-related road safety. And the first one is to start simple and build the complexity over time. The improvement should be a continuous long-term process, but if you start simply and commence with some quick fixes, some small, easily doable components, then you can build on that and endeavour to address some of the more challenging components. And with regards to that, acknowledge that a positive safety culture is an important requirement. And if we're going to embark on a long-term improvement process, try and keep in mind that just meeting legislative requirements doesn't improve that long term. It only meets those requirements and doesn't necessarily result in a continuous improvement. Now, in regards to the 11 issues that we've highlighted in the guide, the first one is managing the risks associated with vehicle use. Quite often organisations will manage risks with other key workplace processes, risks and hazards with a much more diligent manner than with regards to their vehicle use. So I question organisations, are you managing the risk associated with your vehicles with that same level of diligence and consideration as other workplace risks and hazards? Especially within most organisations, when vehicle use and people driving for work is actually injuring more people than possibly any other workplace process. We've pretty much debunked the silver bullet. We can't have just any one thing. If you've got a problem in your work-related road safety, just picking out one thing and targeting is not going to fix that. We need to take a multi-pronged approach to improve work-related road safety. We need lots of pieces of the puzzle, and we have to pull all those together. Organisations should probably look at their policy and documentation. Oftentimes, probably because vehicle use in an organisation has come from an asset management background, oftentimes policies don't necessarily specifically spell out or go into detail about safety. They focus more on the asset management. So I question organisations, check your policies. Have you actually got a work driving safety policy? Is that mentioned in all of that documentation? In terms of data collection and recording practices, often organisations will rely on crash data or insurance records as the scorecard of how their performance is in relation to driving and driving safety. And whilst that is one mechanism that can be used, what I often find in organisations is that the data that's collected often has areas of missing data, and also we need to be mindful that crashes are the lag data. Whilst that's what we're trying to prevent, we need to move more into a proactive approach. And I say to organisations, if you're going to use crash data or insurance records as your data collection and reporting scorecard of your performance, make sure that it is complete and it delves into the issues that are contributing factors to those incidents occurring. We wouldn't give a chief financial officer only half of our invoices and expect them to do a profit and loss statement. And if you're dealing with crash records and you only have half of the information, then you're not getting the full picture. In terms of infringement monitoring, look at the infringement monitoring processes in your organisation. After all, an infringement is a legislative breach, and is the organisation treating that at the same level of diligence as a legislative breach in another area of the work activities? Next slide, Jane. In terms of licence history checks, are you checking the history of your drivers? There are processes that can occur in various states around Australia and in New Zealand. And part of why we try and move in that direction is, if I talk in regards to Queensland, a driver has a number of demerit points on their licence, and they can accumulate a certain amount of demerit points before they lose their licence. And if we don't do licence history checks in anybody, you could potentially face the case where you've got drivers that have lost points, and they're not going to tell you if you're providing them with a company vehicle and simply a statement that says, look, if you lose your licence, please let us know. In terms of improving work-related road safety and the diligence involved in that, please use dedicated work driving safety specialists. There is a large amount of people that have expertise in the areas. Get them to come in and join your occupational health and safety teams and expertise when that's relevant to driving safety, so that you can get informed decision making and research information. Communication and education of work driving safety. My experience is oftentimes I walk into organisations and they have safety notice boards, And oftentimes the communication strategies again highlight issues around other areas of hazards and risk in the workplace. Next time you walk into your organisation and you look at your hazard safety notice board, do you actually have any communication up there that promotes safe driving, or is that just something that gets missed? With regards to procurement of new vehicles, have you got an induction process? Yes, people are often licensed, and quite often that means they should be capable of driving a vehicle safely, but oftentimes with the technology being implemented into vehicles, we need to make sure that people fully understand the operations of those vehicles. And in a lot of other vehicles or machinery to do with the workplace, a vehicle induction would be an initial component before you were deemed capable of operating that piece of equipment. And what I suggest is that while if you work with the procurement organisation, you could probably include some sort of an induction process strategy in that procurement process. Oftentimes within organisations, driving for work comprises quite a fair proportion of people's work week. Oftentimes if people work a 40 or a 50-hour week, they might be driving for approximately half of that in some organisations. Some organisations it's more. Within that, is driving for work considered within the job description? Not just a statement that says, you know, are you licensed or you've got to have a licence, but is it a key performance indicator? Safe driving should be valued and it should come into a performance appraisal review process. And in terms of the final point, benchmarking and evaluations of strategies and interventions, we're going to elaborate on that point more so in Chapter 5. So I'll leave that there at this point.
And
Do you have any
we're
questions?
coming to our question break. So ladies and gentlemen, obviously don't be shy. Webinars are best enjoyed when there are lots of questions coming through so we can get a good discussion going. But on this occasion we don't have any questions, so I might just hand back over to who's covering the next chapter.
That's me, Angela. Eric here.
Hello, Eric. Talk to us a little bit more about Chapter 2.
Thanks, Angela. This is the safe system approach, which we deal with at some length in the guide, and there's a whole philosophy around safe system. This is not just a slightly different way of doing things. It's a very different approach to road safety. It's looking at road safety in its entirety on the road network, all of the factors, and recognising that while each component of risk has a contributes to the overall road safety outcome, or lack thereof, it's the combination of elements that contribute to those risks that are very, very important. And those combinations, if identified and tackled in a positive way, can bring great benefit. But let's look quickly at the philosophy behind safe system. We say that road death and serious injury are unacceptable. I think that's a valid statement to make about our community's view of that road trauma. Secondly, people make mistakes. The notion that human beings can be perfect creatures is, of course, fanciful. And so people will make mistakes, not necessarily breaking the law, but they will make mistakes, and we need to plan for that. The human body has a certain level of frailty. There is only so much force that can be withstood in any crash. And we now know a lot about crash forces. We know a great deal about human survivability for the young and the old and the medium road user. And that's very important to contributing to our understanding of what can avoid fatal crash forces and what can be done to save lives. We look for a forgiving road transport system. If people are going to make mistakes, and there is a limit to their human physical capacity, how do we make sure that the road transport system provides a safety valve when they do get into difficulty having made such a mistake? And that's a relatively new concept. It's at the heart of safer vehicle design, certainly safer infrastructure design, coming through in a better appreciation of the role of speed limits and also road user behaviour matters. And the fifth point, shared responsibility. It used to be a case of blaming the driver. Those days are gone. We now realise that many players contribute to the safety on our networks, not just the road builders and maintainers and operators, not just the vehicle suppliers or the transport company operators, but people such as land use planners and roadside developers and so on. There are many, many players in this space, and only by understanding that and working with each of them can we make gains. Thanks, James. Next one, please. So, the safe system approach can be shown in a number of ways. This is one representation. And while that may seem a little complex, it's basically saying inside the big blue box you have safe speeds, you have safe vehicles, you have safe roads and roadsides. And it's the combination of those three key elements, assuming that drivers are alert and compliant, that little caveat at the top of the blue box. We can't really cope yet with people breaking the law. But if people are alert and compliant and just making mistakes, then their speed of travel, the safety features of their vehicle, and the inherent road safety elements of the roads and roadsides will determine the forces they're subjected to in a crash, and therefore whether they live or die. And this diagram has great merit in that it shows the linkages between those three elements, and I think conveys the understanding that you can make great gains by adjusting one or two or three of those factors to improve safety outcomes. There are some supporting roles outside the graphic: admittance to the systems, good licensing arrangements, understanding crashes, of course. Unless we know what our risks are, how can we do anything about it? Enforcement of road rules, which is really the whole legislative deterrence aspect, which is part of what James talked about earlier with Hugh Mackay's comment about changing the environment. You can do it physically or you can do it through deterrence. And education and information, letting people know what this means and what to expect from them as road users. And the cornerstone areas are there on the right hand side, and I've talked about those. Thanks, James. Now, it's one thing to talk of legal requirements, but safe system is challenging organisations, challenging all of us to move beyond those legal requirements to substantially improve road safety outcomes. This is a journey towards zero fatalities and serious injuries. It may be 20, 30, 40 years away, longer in some countries. But countries such as Sweden and Netherlands and UK and some of the Australian states are doing very well and have made enormous progress in recent years. Thanks, James. So I've talked about the major elements. I should mention quality post-crash care, which is something that any company with staff utilising the transport network needs to give considerable thought to. What are the arrangements for getting people quickly to hospital or to care in the event of a crash? And the medical profession play a massive role in reducing fatalities from road crashes and in converting those fatalities to injury and rehabilitation. And I've talked about the support activities. I won't go over that again, but they're listed below. Thanks, James. This is one of the representations of safe system. As I said, there are a number that's in the diagram. This is the South Australian diagram. It has its pluses and minuses, but I think what's interesting of this is the outer circle, which is results-focused management. We're going to talk about that a little later. And management of road safety, like most things, is at the heart of changing outcomes. And we'll deal with that shortly. Thank you. And then if we look at workplace safety, we don't change working processes and trade them off to get increased health risks. In other words, workplace safety isn't a flexible thing that we can trade off that would lead to further injury. Just as mobility traditionally regarded as the main purpose of the road transport system should not really be traded off for safety. It's how we have looked at it in the past, but safe system takes a different view. It resets mobility You can't do it tomorrow, but over the next 5 to 10 years, it resets mobility as being a function of safety. So we used to say, and we still say today in many cases, we will get you between A and B as quickly as we can, and we will try and make it as safe as possible. What we now say, or what we're looking to introduce, is a new approach that says we'll get you from point A to point B safely within the limits of safe system, depending on the quality of the infrastructure, and this is greatly influenced by speed limits and travel speed, and we'll do it at a speed, we'll get you there as quickly as we can within the constraints of safety. Big shift from what we've traditionally looked at, and strong messages there for the Australian environment in particular. So this means we're going to be looking as a country, and as countries in New Zealand and Australia, at substantial infrastructure safety works over time to make that infrastructure forgiving, and substantial speed limit reviews, particularly in Australia. New Zealand don't have quite the high limits that we do. Thanks, James. Are there any questions that people would like to raise? We'd be happy to try and do it.
Thanks for that, Eric. That was very insightful, and I actually popped in the chat box there a discussion question. I was interested to know who out of our audience had previously heard of the safe system philosophy. Certainly one we're familiar with here at ARB Group, and we've had a number of people say that they haven't. So I'm glad you presented that section, Eric. I actually have a question. I was wondering how well Australia is doing, with respect to road injuries and fatalities, with respect to other countries around the world. Where do we fit in?
Okay. Well, one measure that is used commonly is deaths per 100,000, road deaths per 100,000 population. Sweden is challenging around 2 per 100,000. The UK and Netherlands are at or below 3. New South Wales last year was challenging 4. Victoria a little above that. And over perhaps 15 years, the figure in Victoria has dropped from 8 down to that level of 4. So you can see the rate of change, and that's common for the higher performing countries, a very strong rate of improvement. So there are age groups now within Sweden, for example, where people are not killed each year, particularly younger children and some older groups, and that's a very significant development, because that is emphasising that if you make the system fundamentally safe in accordance with a safe system philosophy, you will get to 0 deaths. Maybe 25 years away for us here in Australia, but it's coming. And the big plus for us, number one, is an understanding of this, encouraging people to buy safe vehicles, and the vehicle industry is providing such incredible features now within vehicles. It's really going to kick along that improved safety. So I think with great reason to be optimistic. In Australia, we have probably the best, in aggregate, the best behavioural programs in the world, but we have very poor infrastructure, given that we have the greatest number of kilometres of road per taxpayer in the developed world, and we have inappropriate speed limits because we haven't thought through the risk associated with travel speeds on certain types of roads in terms of their risk. So many challenges, but we're starting from a good place.
Well, we'll get there eventually. I'm sure these things do take time. Thank you for that, Eric. I'm going to shoot a question through to Darren that popped up shortly after his part of the presentation, and that question came through from Amanda. Thank you, Amanda. The question is, how do you handle the challenge of keeping contact with drivers who don't come into the office?
Right. I think in organisations you can set up various mechanisms with today's technology to assist in that. Now that might be not only technology that might be implemented in the car to monitor what's going on or keep in touch with what's occurring, but also set up times to check in, if you like, and help keep that communication happening. I think also with the technology that you can, with those drivers in the field, utilise that technology to communicate and promote work driving safety. For example, a number of organisations that we've been working with now have e-systems that communicate, an issue a month. They focus on a particular work driving safety issue. So this month might be fatigue, say, for example. And they embark upon promotion and sharing of information about that to create an awareness. So I think the use of technology is probably one of the main answers to help with that.
Wonderful. Thank
Can
you
I
for that.
add a point to that as well?
Yeah.
Please do, James.
Yeah, and supporting also where Darren is going, and some of the points that he mentioned earlier around the need for data collation as well. I think when you do have remote drivers and remote operations that don't come into the office regularly, it becomes even more important that data collation is centralized, and that such as infringement data, as an example, can come to one central point, because what I've seen in a lot of organizations is that when operations are done remotely, a lot of the control mechanisms are also done remotely. Therefore, there's not a connection between a central point and the remote operation. Therefore, the likes of infringement data or insurance data and so on isn't holistically collated, but it's done with the isolated or satellite offices, and therefore no trends or identifying of, say, high-risk users is poorly done. But if it's centralized, controlling that data can actually help to identify some of those issues, or the issues within, there might be a particular area that's having a lot of infringement or insurance claims, but unless that's centrally collated, it's not going to be possible to get that.
That's a good point there, James. Thanks for that. And thank you, Amanda, for the question. And I think we might move on to the next chapter, shall we?
Yeah, so if I didn't have enough to say then, I've got some more to say now, because I'm presenting this one. So this chapter here is a building of the previous two. So it's the intention of the guide was that Chapter 1 that Darren presented on looked at these common areas and common concerns that we're identifying that's not being delivered on really well across the board, and then also following through with the section that Eric spoke on and the methodologies of safe system approach, understanding what that is. The idea of this chapter here is that to try and look at applying the safe system approach in practical sense to provide some resource for organisations moving forward. So he's going to present and talk through a couple of the main points. This area, one of the key concerns we see is that a lot of organisations, and I think I mentioned this at the start, kind of nudge road safety every now and again when it pops up on the radar. It's not something that we have organisations thinking very boldly about or developing significant outcomes or thinking solutions. It's something that at a senior management level, I think if we're going to change the environment in which work-related road safety is engaged in an organisation, we really need to be thinking these things around safe systems, thinking bold, thinking solutions, engaging expertise, and developing significant outcomes to really grasp with the concept of what work-related road safety is and how it can be delivered. Again here, thinking about the 4 key elements, the building blocks as Eric presented on safer vehicles, safe roads and roadsides, safe speed and safe user, and not thinking of them just as individual risks, although we need to identify them as individual risks in their own right. It's the holistic and systematic approach of those elements and how they interrelate with each other to create the road safety issues and or outcomes and solutions. So I just want to bring out a couple of ideas, concepts here. In no way are they going to fit all organisations, but they're just some initial thoughts around some of these building blocks of the key elements in safe systems. So safer vehicles. Ideally, 5-star NCAP rated vehicles is the primary primary criteria in procurement of vehicles, particularly light fleet. And within that, we need to also understand that even though I see a lot of organisations purchasing only 5-star NCAP rated vehicles, some of them then start to retrofit some bells and whistles onto it that can start creating issues for the safety features or help kind of prevent some of those safety issues from being able to be utilised correctly in the vehicle. So yes, often we see fleets buying 5-star NCAP rated vehicles, but then start retrofitting them, and it actually can make the vehicle less safe. So it's an area we also need to be concerned in. Obviously, organisations that don't have a policy, be it small, medium or large, that isn't already purchasing 5-star NCAP rated vehicles would strongly recommend that they do. The ongoing benefit of that isn't just for their organisation and the risk reduction that that represents within their workplace environment, but also when those fleet vehicles are then sold on to the community, it means that the community are also buying as second-hand vehicles. They're able to buy 5-star NCAP rated vehicles. So we're helping the whole community transition into safer vehicles. So it's a great corporate initiative that organisations can be taking up. Safer roads and roadsides. For large organisations and some of the multinational organisations, this is often misunderstood, and it's also often seen as just being a responsibility of government, that they take care of the roads and the roadsides, and we just drive and we do our work. But I've seen a few expansion projects and warehouse development that where organisations or how organisations build their warehousing or undertake their expansion projects, understanding the road and the roadside environment, understanding how they can actually influence or engage in making the access roads and so on safer, has strong ramifications for a very long period of time. Much more than just dealing with the likes of a road user himself. We can engage in influencing infrastructure that has a very long life in itself. For smaller organisations, we're probably not going to be able to directly influence the likes of roading infrastructure, but still there is an element in which roads and roadsides can be understood, and that's the likes of identifying high risk or identifying intersections that are commonly used that are high risk and communicating that through your organisation, so then we've got greater awareness. Such as for heavy vehicles, avoiding school zones during the start and end of school, so then we're mitigating some of these risks around those schooling environments. There's different practical applications across the board that we can be considering. Speed, safe speed and speeding. Understand particularly in the rural and more remote environments that sticking to the speed limit and so on isn't always the safest option. Some of these roads we need to be able to drive to the conditions and the environment and not just the speed limit. But also the other side of that, from a speeding perspective and from an infringement perspective, and as I just mentioned before in answering the previous question, the collation of infringement data, understanding if or who the infringement or risk from speeding is and where that relates in the organisation. Safe user, obviously a critical element here, and but unfortunately it's also the one that's most commonly used and looked at. So yes, we need good education, we need good awareness of road safety and the different issues that relate around it in our application, but also we need to understand that if we just focused on the road user, it's going to be the most expensive, the most long-term and resource demanding element of all four of them to be able to change. And that's strongly represented if we looked at the OC health and safety hierarchy of controls. The actual bottom two elements of the hierarchy of controls is where we start looking at the user and the human elements. And also, as Hugh Mackay mentioned, dealing with just the messages alone doesn't work. So collectively, and I know I've spoken for a wee while on these 4 points, but collectively and holistically we need to consider the safe vehicles that we use and the ones that we select, safe roads and roadsides and how we can engage, influence or risk manage in that element, safe speeds and the safe user collectively and holistically in the interrelationship. The last point I want to bring on this is for senior management more so than others, but it's understanding that simple and logical road safety business decisions can have huge influences in the ongoing effects that road safety can have both within the organisation but for the greater community as well.
James, sorry to cut you off there. Could we flick through the slides? Yeah, I think they haven't been quite matched up to what you've been saying. Sorry, could we just flick through them quickly?
Yep, no, we're up to date. That's okay.
We're up to date? Okay, no worries.
Yep, that's fine. The point I just want to make here is that I won't talk to this, but the NZTA have produced some really good material on understanding safe system approach, both in the likes of their brochure, which this slide is taken from, but they've also produced, I think it's about a 15-20 minute video on understanding a safe system, and I'd strongly recommend that people involved in the webinar go and find that. I believe it's available to view online. Look up the NZTA safe system video. It's about 20 minutes long. It's really, really good to have a look at. So very quickly on case study, safe system approach in road safety is about shared responsibility. Quickly here, the example I want to give is from a very large Australian company that's taken on the responsibility that if they identify and have issues with a particular road user within the organisation, they don't just remove that person from or the user from the organisation, but rather they actually take them in, work with them, identify the risks and provide education and tools and resource to help that person to become a safer user, because they've taken on the concept that if they were just to remove or fire the person from their organisation for unsafe behaviour, that person's just going to get a job down the road. And once again, we haven't isolated that person from the environment or helped fix that environment. All we've done is shift the problem from one organisation to another, but in the greater community and greater shared responsibility, that hazard still exists. So it's a great sign of maturity of an organisation, and I'd encourage other organisations to take up that approach as well, is that when we are dealing with identified hazards and risks, that we deal with it. We don't try and isolate it or remove it, but we work out how best we can fix it, because it helps the whole and greater community. So this is the last slide here, and that's the question of does your organisation consider the whole of road safety risk, bring that slide, I've got other things in mind. Does consider work-related road safety risk as an interrelationship is in the key elements of road safety? So that's where we're going to end with, and if we, hang on, sorry. There we go. Any questions on this section?
Thank you for that, and look, we'll leave that discussion question open there, because I'd be interested to see if anyone from our audience in the workplace, you know, that are considering that interrelationship. We have a question here from Michael, but it doesn't relate to this section, and I'm just conscious of time now. We might get to the section, and then we'll get to Michael's question at the end.
Okay, it's Eric again, and this chapter is all about how do we deal with needing to recognise where we are with our road safety management. Have we got capacity? In most cases, whatever the organisation, there won't be adequate capacity. And I would just quickly make the point that it's fine to think about what you're going to do in terms of actions, but unless you have a solid management capacity, a solid set of systems, and an overall leadership commitment, it's unlikely that you'll have long-term success. Let's go to the first slide. Thanks, James. A capacity review is the term we use, looking at how can we work out what our capacity is to manage road safety. It's usually a one-off process, and it's a platform for achieving improved performance. Thank you. If we look at the next slide, we rely on checklists, and they're included in the guide. We'll talk about those in a moment, but they help the organisation to identify its road safety issues, the issues that it is impacted upon and it impacts on, look at its current capacity to manage those issues, enables the organisation to take decisions about what it needs to do to strengthen its management system, and through that, how it can then respond to road safety risks, to knowledge gaps and system shortfalls. And this approach has been built upon that developed and recommended by the World Bank for use by countries across the world. It's been applied in many countries now in the last 10, 11 years. And it's also entirely consistent with the approach contained within ISO 39001, the Road Safety Management Standard for organisations. So while at first glance for large organisations it may seem quite complex, it is in part a recognition that yes, these are complex matters to get your management of anything right, but also it provides a series of steps to move through in a structured way to identify what you will do. Thanks, James. And this little diagram is really just saying we all have results that we want to achieve in safety or whatever. There are a lot of actions that we need to take to achieve those results. But unless we have our organisational management functions sorted out and strengthened adequately, we're unlikely to get optimum outcomes at the top of the triangle. Very important point. Thank you. Now, in terms of strengthening management systems, there's so much that we need to do, and it's basically up to each of us to, in our organisations, to identify what the shortcomings are. Thanks, Jones. Just get that. Thank you. If you look at critical functions, if you're going to improve performance, road safety performance in your organisation, you've got to have a focus on results, so you've got to want to achieve good outcomes. You've got to have senior management leadership. You've got to have good coordination across the organisation, much more difficult in large organisations. You've got to have good road safety related controls, good systems, good procedures. It's got to be adequate funding, adequate resource allocation, and that person responsible for managing the road safety performance of the organisation in a large organisation should have a very direct access to the chief executive. You've got to fulfil the activities of promotion upwards within the organisation to the chief executive and the board, promotion across the organisation to all the people involved in road safety related activities, and of course there's got to be good knowledge transfer to make people aware of latest thinking, latest processes, and some training will be needed, of course, to do that. And then monitoring assessment. How are we going? Unless we measure, we can't manage, and it's important that we do that. Thanks, Jones. So what does a review do? Well, basically It helps us identify organisational responsibilities, organisational accountabilities, and that's absolutely crucial, isn't it? If someone isn't accountable for an outcome, it's highly unlikely to happen. It provides a platform so that we can agree on what the capacity weaknesses are in this area in our organisation, and it also then helps us identify through discussion how we can best address those capacity weaknesses. Thanks, James. Let's look at the review scale and steps. The next slide, thanks. As I suggested before, it's less complex in small organisations, and we've set out an approach, a series of notes really in Annex A in the guide. And those of you who haven't seen the guide, Angela's going to make sure you get the web reference so you can access the document and have it available to you. In Annex B, we've got a series of checklists of questions to be asked in a review for small to medium organisations, and a separate annex for the medium to large organisations. And as I said before, while it may seem a bit daunting, these are the questions that have to be raised and discussed openly if there is to be an understanding of what's required, identification of weaknesses, and then commencement of the journey to deal with those weaknesses. And so in preparing for a review, you've got to get your context sorted out, know where you sit in terms of your use of the transport system, the modes that you use, the demands you put on the system, and you need to, of course, quantify your current work-related road safety performance by identifying risks and opportunities. And as Darren said before, you've got to perhaps go beyond the basic crash data that you have and look at more carefully at those risks where possible. Thanks, James. The Annex F in particular sets out the steps to be taken in a review, setting the objectives, preparing for it, as I've said before, conducting interviews and discussions. Then, of course, all importantly, developing an action plan to move forward. What are we going to do? And it's not just about interventions, it's about building management capacity. This is the area where organisations fall down, countries, authorities fall down continuously. They go and focus on the actions, the to-do things, the physical activities or the detailed activities, without thinking about the management capacity, the capacity of the systems and positions to actually oversee what is required. It's a common problem. And we've got some templates for use there in Annex D and E that people might use to get their action planning sorted out. And then you need to confirm these review findings at high level in the organisation. It must be owned by those at the top. Thanks, James. So learning by doing is what it's all about. When you work through a review, you work out what it is you need to do to strengthen your management capacity. You need, therefore, to sort out what actions are likely to be needed to be taken and how you're going to go about that. And then that action plan will be implemented and adjusted over time. And we have to accept that we're never going to get it perfectly right up front. You have to learn over a number of years what works best in your situation. But that's fine. That's not a reason not to move forward. But we want to get it as right as we can. And you will learn how to strengthen your management arrangements. You'll learn to find out what it is you should be doing to help your organisation improve its performance. And the final slide that we've got, thanks James, senior management has to be open to change. If the senior management is supportive, you can do a great deal indeed. And you need the senior management to share in the ownership of this and the responsibility for work-related safety. I think that probably goes without saying, but I wanted to say it anyway. Questions?
Thank you very much, Eric. Just in light of the time, I thought our audience will probably be more interested to see the last bit of the presentation, and we'll see if we have some time for questions at the end. And ladies and gentlemen, if we don't get around to your questions today, we will endeavour to get back to everyone, or obviously feel free to get in touch with myself or the presenters for a discussion after the webinar. Thank you for your understanding.
Okay, this is Darren. So auditing, monitoring and evaluations, this chapter is about some important considerations for that. A couple of building blocks to improving work-related road safety with regards to auditing, monitoring. Firstly, review the risks, the opportunities and, as has been stated in the previous chapter, management capacity as a first step to increasing the focus on that work-related road safety. We need to monitor the ongoing assessment of our work-related road safety activities and also our initiatives. And with regards to those initiatives, interventions, we need to evaluate them. Oftentimes organisations will put strategies and interventions in place, and down the track we'll often ask the question, so how did that go? And they go, well, we think it worked, but we didn't really collect the data beforehand, or we didn't collect the data afterwards, or we didn't think of how to plan that out, we just implemented. So we need to try and make sure that we evaluate, and was that strategy successful? In regards to auditing, there's basically two broad concepts of types of auditing, and by the way, as has been noted in the presentation, there are links to countless resources within the guide to assist in auditing and monitoring, and you can, if you download the guide, you can access those links. With regards to auditing, there's basically two types. There's a self-audit or an external audit. Now they both have positives and negatives, and I'm only going to summarise this fairly quickly given the time. In terms of a self-audit, so that's doing it yourself within the company, utilising some of those resources that are available. It's very cost efficient. It's not difficult to do. The resources talk you through how to do it. And there's very little disruption within the organisation. The negatives relate to not necessarily having the knowledge from a work-related road safety capacity, knowledge of research and practices. It's not necessarily as detailed, and oftentimes within an organisation, if there are hidden agendas, there can be a potential bias in that self-audit. If you go down the path of an external audit, so you get a contractor to come in and do an audit for you, the positives are they're very experienced, they come with a lot of knowledge, it overcomes some of the self-report and potential bias difficulties because it's more objective. The negatives are it's usually a little bit more costly, and it tends to be a little bit more disruptive to the day-to-day work processes. What I'd recommend to organisations and in the guide is that you endeavour to embark upon both processes. Both a self-audit and an external audit will help identify some of these key issues. And the key audit questions that we're often asked is how often should the audit process be undertaken, and what are we going to do with the results? So in terms of how often the audit process should be undertaken, my suggestion would be certainly on an annual basis, and at worst every second year. But because it's such a dynamic environment we work in, certainly auditing on an annual basis will be good. And part of the reason that I recommend that is if you do an audit this year, you'll identify what things need to be fixed and implement a plan to improve things. When you conduct it again next year, you can firstly revisit what did you do that you said you were going to do, and what resources do you need to do that. And that leads into the final question, which is what are you going to do with those results? The audit will identify some deficiencies in your systems and processes within an organisation, and then your work-related road safety committee, task force needs to sit down and strategically work towards fixing some of those gaps and addressing some of those deficiencies. So there you go. I'll hand it back over to Angela.
Why, thank you very much. And I just want to take this opportunity to thank all three of you for, well, not literally joining me in the webinar studio, but for your time in preparing this material and sharing it with our audience today. We have had a few questions in relation to whether we're recording the session and whether the presentation materials will be available. And yes, that will definitely be the case. So if you just kindly keep an eye on your emails, this afternoon we'll be sending through some documents to you. Given the time, and we have had a number of people drop off, so I am going to have to cut this webinar presentation short. If anyone feels that they'd like to discuss their questions further that we haven't been able to address today, please don't hesitate to contact us. There's information up on the screen there. Or, of course, once you receive the email from me, you'll have my email also. Thank you once again for your time, to our kind audience for allowing us to put this presentation on and for being here to learn a little bit more about it. I found it particularly interesting. Thank you, James, Darren and Eric, for your time.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.